Hey guys, welcome to the first video for chapter 31. The title of this one is New Nations Emerge, and this chapter is going to focus on how in post-World War II you had widespread independence movements throughout the regions that were previously colonized by Europe in the 18 and early 1900s. We're going to be looking at the Indian subcontinent, we're going to be looking at Africa, and we're going to be looking at the Middle East. Now, there were significant differences between the different regions and how they adapted to independence, but a common theme will be the legacy of years of colonial rule. All right, so the first area we're going to be looking at is India, with Indian independence. Now, as we discussed in Chapter 27, a very strong nationalist independence movement was built upon the leadership of Mohandas Gandhi, one of the more famous and iconic figures of the 20th century. And Gandhi's nonviolent movement of civil disobedience, which included mass strikes and boycotting British goods. Here you see him at his most famous, boycott of the Salt March. That was starting to wear on the British. And after World War II, the British decided that holding on to India was just too much trouble. It wasn't worth it for them anymore. So they agreed to independence on August 13th, 1947. And India had finally gained its independence. But the victory was not the one that Gandhi envisioned, because the British had accepted, as part of the whole independence package, the idea of partition. Now, partition means to divide, right? If you partition a room, you split it, you divide it. Well before the British got to India, a major problem for the subcontinent was Hindu and Muslim issues. They had been violence at each other's throat for a long time. India has a Hindu majority, and this was included in the Congress Party. The Congress Party was the political leadership of the Indian independence movement. Here you see Gandhi in the middle, surrounded by other members of it. Gandhi himself was a practicing Hindu, although Gandhi preached, kind of the equality of all religions. Now, the Congress Party wasn't all Hindu, though. It did have Muslim representatives, and they made up what was called the Muslim League. It was led by this gentleman here, Muhammad Jinnah. Now, Jinnah and the Muslim League believed that the Muslims would never be given equal rights in this newly independent India, that they would always be disenfranchised by the Hindu majority. And so as violence between Hindus and Muslims increased, the British eventually agreed to the idea of partition, right, of dividing India into two countries. India would remain a Hindu majority, while the areas that had a Muslim majority became the nation of Pakistan. Right, you see on the map. Now, Pakistan initially was divided. You had a West Pakistan and an East Pakistan. That was because these were the two regions that you had Muslim majorities. That was not going to last for very long. It just became untenable. It really wasn't working well to have a single country divided like this. So eventually East Pakistan is going to become Bangladesh. And that's what it is today. All right. So West Pakistan is just Pakistan, and East Pakistan is Bangladesh. Now, both Pakistan and India gained their independence on the same day, at the very same time. But it didn't even come close to solving all the religious problems. Partition resulted in a massive refugee crisis. Let me get rid of this stuff first. Okay. Muslims in India fled to Pakistan. Hindus in Pakistan fled to India. All total, 10 million people left their homes, and many of them just with whatever belongings they could fit on the back of a carriage, or sometimes just carrying themselves. Plus, violence, along the refugee trails was unfortunately very, very common. Muslims were attacked by both Hindus and Sikhs. Hindus were attacked by Muslims. It really got very, very ugly. All total, close to 1 million people died from a combination of violence, starvation, and disease. Now, we'll get back to discussing Pakistan a little bit, but first let's get into India, specifically the Indian government. Now, India had a bit of first off, India is the world's largest democracy. Now, that's an important fact to know, that with over 1 billion people, they are considered a parliamentary democracy, so they hold that distinction. But when they first got started, India had a tough time transitioning into independence. Some stability in leadership helped, and it was led by for over 40 years by one family. And this started with, I got to make sure I say his name right, Jawaharlal Nehru. Now, Nehru was, kind of one of the guys that worked with Gandhi side by side throughout the very beginnings of the Indian independence movement. And after independence, he became India's first prime minister. He died in office in 1964, but he was succeeded only a couple of years after that by his daughter, Indira Gandhi. Now, she is no relation to Mohandas Gandhi. As I said, she's Nehru's daughter. Gandhi is her married name, but her husband has no relation whatsoever. It is purely a coincidence. And she served, as I said, in prime minister for over 20 years. Now, the fact that a woman could serve as the head of a government for almost 2 decades was a major step forward for India. And also throughout this time, the Cold War was going on. And India decided to follow an official policy of non-alignment, meaning that they were pretty much going to sit it out, that they were not going to go either for or against the United States or the Soviet Union. Social changes. India is a very old civilization, and it's got some social systems that go back centuries, that go back hundreds of years. Some of these systems, unfortunately, can be repressive, though, such as the caste system. Now, you remember the caste system, we've talked about it since freshman year. You got priests up at the top, you got peasants, and then you got your, down at the very bottom, Dalits. All right, the untouchables. Now, the caste system wasn't followed as strictly by the 20th century as it was in classical times, but it was still around. And especially in the countryside, it still had an awful lot of influence in daily life. Now, this could be rough for the Dalits. Gandhi worked very hard to try and end discrimination. Here you see even a more modern picture, cast out caste, right? These reform movements to try and do away with the old caste system, repressive policies. The new government did put forth, some provisions to end discrimination against Dalits, against untouchables, and it also actually created some new positions for them. Another group that was often mistreated were women. India is a very, very strongly patriarchal society, going back to ancient times. Now, we just said, they had a female head of government for many, many years. So it's obvious that women were given political rights. The new constitution gave them the right to vote, and they could also divorce and inherit property. That being said, all of this did not completely end discrimination against untouchables, nor did it end mistreatment of women. Right? The women's rights movements are still a major, major force in India, even today in the 21st century. Laws by themselves don't do it. The same way that we have laws that officially, outlaw discrimination, racial discrimination, or gender discrimination in the United States, that doesn't mean that it doesn't still happen. So, especially in the countryside, rural areas, they tend to be more socially conservative, whether we're talking India, the United States, anywhere in the world. And in India, the countryside, they tend to keep more restrictions on women and untouchables. So those are still social causes that are issues today. All right, now religious conflicts. As we said before, they're unfortunately a very common aspect of Indian history, and they have been for a long time. Religious violence led to the creation of Pakistan in the first place. Now, much of the conflict is Hindus versus Muslims, and this issue, as I said, was not solved by partition. It even claimed Gandhi's life when he was assassinated. Hold on, let me move me back down here. Actually, let me move me here. There we go. Gandhi was assassinated by a Hindu extremist, one of his own people, because the Hindu extremists felt that he was a sellout, that he was betraying them. So, unfortunately, it cost him his life very tragically. And now it's not as severe as it was during times of partition, but this problem, is still, it runs very deep, and it's a problem that it contributes to India versus Pakistan to this day. And this rivalry is complicated even farther by the fact that both nations have nuclear programs, right? That's why the Indian subcontinent has been referred to as a mini Cold War at times. A big cause of the conflict between the two nations is over a territorial dispute of the region of Kashmir. Now, Kashmir is this region up here, it borders both China, India, and Pakistan, and it's a disputed territory. It's predominantly Muslim, so most of the population wants to be part of Pakistan, but India has never agreed to fully allow it to go over to Pakistan. And so because of this, it's led to wars between India and Pakistan a couple times throughout the decades. Now, Hindus and Muslims aren't the only religious groups that are in India, nor the only religious groups that have had problems. You also have Sikhs. I remember learning about these guys last year. Sikhs are known for their very distinctive turbans and facial hair. They are not Muslim. They are not Hindu. They combine some elements of both, but they are a separate religion. They make up a sizable population in the Punjab region. And in the 1980s, they actually called for Punjabi independence. The Punjab region goes on both sides of the border of Pakistan and India. And they claim that, similar to the way that Muslims felt that they were never going to get a fair shake, and so they demanded Pakistan, Sikhs feel that they're never going to get a fair shake in a Hindu-dominated country, so they demand independence. This actually got violent when they went to one of their most sacred shrines, the Golden Temple, and they kind of took it hostage, so to speak. Indira Gandhi sent in the Indian army, and it resulted in violence. The protesters were shot and killed. Consequently, because of this, Indira Gandhi was assassinated. One of her bodyguards was a Sikh, and because, out of a sense of Sikh nationalism, took it upon himself to assassinate her. So very tragic end to her life as well. All right, so basic overview of Indian independence and then some of the issues that they've had over the last couple of decades. And for the next video, we're going to be getting into African independence.